Tatiana Diaz. I'm the Director of Multicultural Programs here at Messiah College, and today it is my pleasure to introduce to you all the 2013 cohort of the Martin Scholars. This cohort is the first of the Martin Scholars that are part of the four-year program. Part of the four-year program included a first-year class that was, as Jean shared, taught by Professor McFarland Harris. And some of the many topics that they touched upon in that class was the feminization of poverty, which seemed to be a great connection to today, this year's Humanities Symposium Wealth. There's always two sides to a coin, and today we're going to be talking about poverty and the female side of it. It is a poverty and this side of it, it's a very complex, very multifaceted, and it's definitely a global problem that we are having. And so today what we're going to do is each one of our Martin Scholars will be sharing one facet of this very complex issue. And after this very short presentations showing diverse perspectives on the issue, we'll open it up for questions, and we hope to see you all participate and hope to get your opinions about it. So our first Martin Scholar will be
Okay, I'm Kendall Brown, and I'm a psychology major. I just have kind of intro stuff about the feminization of poverty. So what is the feminization of poverty? According to the United Nations, it's a growing visibility of the women's poverty and an inequality of gender. It's caused by a growth in female-headed households and in-house inequalities like bias against women and girls, and economic policies. A lot of them are changing. For example, a reduction in welfare spending, especially for female-headed households. What is the poverty line? The poverty line is defined between the relationship between income and the amount of money needed to meet basic needs such as food. And internationally, extreme poverty is defined as earning less than $1 a day. The feminization of poverty is not just a current issue. It's been getting worse for at least the past 2 decades. For example, between 1969 and 1978, the number of poor families headed by women with minor children increased by 1/3. This is from 1.8 million to 2.7 million. In 1983, two out of 3 poor adults were women. 3/4 of the world's poor are women and children. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, in 1985, the poverty rate for female-headed households is almost 3%, 3 times that of the male-headed households, and that's nearly 5 times that of husband and wife families. Present day in the United States, female-headed households are more vulnerable to increased unemployment. According to the 2010 U.S. Census, the poverty rate among women rose to 14.5%. This is the highest rate in the past 17 years. More than 40% of single mothers are now living in poverty. And also, the poverty rate for children jumped 22% from the last census. The poverty gender gap is higher in the United States than any other developing country, but that doesn't mean that it's just a problem in the United States. Globally, the feminization of poverty is a very big problem. In both developing and developed countries, there's an increased number of female-headed households. According to the Global Poverty Project, it estimates that 70% of the world's poor are women. The United Nations says that women earn only 10% of the world's income and own less than 1% of the world's property. This is very interesting compared to the statistic that women produce half the world's food and work an estimated of 2/3 of the world's working hours. And when they work 2/3 of the world's working hours, they earn an average of 50% less than men.
As we all know, the feminization of poverty is a major issue in our society today, but it's not just a issue here in the United States, but it is an issue globally. The International Center for Research on Women reviewed 61 headship studies conducted in developing countries and in 53 of them, they found greater poverty in female-headed families. And in 1998, in 41 countries, there was 17% difference in the number of men and women under the rural poverty line. And by the late 80s, it was estimated that of the world's total households, female-headed ones constituted 17 to 28% of poverty. And this simply to say that the difference between men and women's poverty is that most of it is from women. One of the major issues that women today suffer from is gendercide. Gendercide is when one gender is persecuted, in this case female infanticide, which is the practice in some societies of killing unwanted children soon after birth, typically females. And this is most common in India and China, however, is prevalent in many countries. The reasons that these countries do these kinds of things is because of financial reasons. In most countries, they feel as though having a baby girl would mean that she cannot work the same jobs as many men can, so she would be a financial burden. Also, the fact that in most countries, when a woman gets married, she belongs to her husband's family, and her family would no longer see her again. So they wonder, why would we want a baby girl when she's going to just leave? Also, the fact that in many families around the world, they have to pay a dowry for their child's marriage, and that would be another financial burden on the family. And in many countries, there are government policies, such as in China, that increase gendercide and female infanticide. China has the One Child Policy Act, also known as the Family Planning Act, which also increases female abortions because of the fact that in Chinese tradition, there is the legacy of keeping a male heir, and in that, since they can only have one child, they normally have abortions for female babies. Why, besides the reasons that we just stated, would people not want to have women in their society? It's because women have less access to land, credits, capital, and jobs with good incomes. And because they are likely to have dependent children, they are disadvantaged and more likely to more vulnerable to poverty. Women also cannot have land, property, credits, capital, jobs because in these male-dominant societies, the men also inherit all of the family's incomes and whatnot. So women, if their husband dies or their husband leaves them or they're stranded somewhere, they have no right to prosperity in any way. And most of these women have children that are dependent on them that they can no longer provide for at that point, leaving them in poverty. The result of these unwanted women, if they make it to adulthood, is that their oppression continues. Not only do they have lack of employment because of the reasons I stated earlier, but they have lack of education because in most of those countries, women are believed to live only in the household and their education is not necessary, and they're male dependent, which means they cannot live without them, without their income or support. This quote is from Linus Acor from The Trafficking of Women in Nigeria, and it says, "Hoping to escape poverty and discrimination at home, they voluntarily migrate to Europe and America in response to job offers as domestic workers or waitresses. However, upon arrival in their country of destination, many of these women discover to their dismay that it is not the much expected El Dorado of their dreams, as the majority of them found themselves trapped in forced prostitution." The sad reality is that many of these women go to more developed nations to find work for their families to provide more, but they are then exploited and found themselves in human trafficking, which is an often result for women and children who are then put into forced labor or sex trafficking. I chose this photo because of the fact that as we're talking about, poverty has a woman's face. In most of the world, poverty is found mainly in women, and without some form of equality, which is lacking in most nations, this won't change.
The topic that I'm discussing is women as dependents of men in society. Society from a young age tells us that women should want to be in relationships because healthy relationships equal happiness and women will regret being alone. Early messages make up this perceived truth about what it means to be female, and without men in our society as well as many global societies, a woman's life seems incomplete without men and with less purpose. Although it's true that gender roles are changing now, but it doesn't mean that these underlying messages are not still present. The core of many gender relationships in all industrial relationships is a woman's economic dependence on men. There is a sexual division of labor all around the world, and this division of labor leads to dependency and support of a woman on a man. The division of labor usually requires women to be working in childcare and housework, and the men are the ones responsible for securing an income. There have been not very many attempts for empirical research in this field, so therefore it becomes very difficult, and some facts are almost invisible when it comes to this field of dependency, which causes a lot of difficulty in confronting it. The next topic is the difficulty of rising out of poverty. There's a quote by Flannery O'Connor, and she states that free will does not mean one will, but many wills conflicting in one man. Free will means that there is an existence of appealing alternatives in a situation, and many of those in poverty situations do not have this appealing alternative, and many times people tell them to simply pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, but it doesn't help if they don't have bootstraps in the first place. And the cycle of poverty, it means generally that poverty has this tendency to transcend through generations. There is an unfair distribution of wealth, not only in this country but around the world, which means that those who are already rich remain rich and become more wealthy, and those who don't have much wealth at all remain that way, and it extends to their future generations. Why are more women in poverty? There are many reasons that this occurs. One of the prime reasons is that involves the workforce. Many women are segregated into low-paying occupations, and these occupations that are dominated by women are specifically lower paid. Women are paid less than men, as Kendall stated earlier, even though they have the same qualifications and may work the same hours as men. Domestic and sexual violence is also a factor that can push women into a cycle of poverty. And pregnancy also affects women's work and educational opportunities, such as jobs will discriminate clearly against a woman who's pregnant or in any part of her pregnancy. These are two graphs that I have that just show the unbalanced contrast between women and men in poverty. In the second graph at the bottom, you can see that this ranges through all racial fields. It is not just any specific race or ethnicity of women. In African American, Hispanic, Asian, and white, all of these women have a higher percentage of poverty than men do. And in the top graph, you can see that it also ranges through all types of women, whether they're pregnant or whether they have children, they have no children. I just wanted to end with a quote by Frederick Douglass. He stated, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe."
I will be discussing motherhood and how its different definitions relates to poverty. So first, I just wanted to give one example of how we see motherhood in respects to different cultures. So I just chose Asian mothers, and I think Americans have sort of a preconceived notion that Asian mothers are drill sergeants and that they drill into their children that they need to be the best, they need to be number one in every subject. And I don't know if you recognize this picture, but this is Amy Kwa, and she's the author of Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom. And she said that while a lot of these notions are true that mothers are very strict, Asian mothers are very strict with their children, they also result in children who are more independent, more responsible, and have much more successful careers than most American children. Specifically in our culture, we have had a huge change over what we think of as motherhood over the past few decades. This is actually an excerpt out of a home ec book in 1955 talking about what a woman's role is. And you can see that a lot of it is mainly based on housework and being in the home You can see when your husband comes home, look nice, make sure your children look nice. Don't greet him with complaints, have dinner ready, make sure he's coming back to a warm and loving household. But conversely, right now, girls are growing up in a society where we are told that we need to do everything. We need to be successful businesswomen, we need to take care of the children, we need to take care of our husband, we should be a loving wife and mother. And this whole mindset affects everything from our education, what education we feel like we should get, our marital age, our income, the homelessness and poverty rate, and even our children's well-being. And this, in essence, creates a modern woman. I have a picture here of what someone thinks a modern woman is. She should be an excellent cook. She should be confident in raising a child. She should be well-read. As you can see, she should also be good at paying bills and also be very fit. This is just one example of how this mindset has affected our whole society, especially with education. Over the past 30 years, you can see that there's been a huge jump in what women think that they should attain as far as education. About 15% of women, of an increase from women attaining their bachelor's degree, as compared to men who've only increased by 4%. Also, specifically right now, currently in 2013, we realize that families cannot survive on a one-income household. And because of that, a lot of single parents, especially single moms, have difficulty staying above the poverty line. And as a result of this, we see more women and children who are forced to live in homeless shelters. Women are forced to sell themselves because they need money for labor or for prostitution. And because they do need the support, they will stay in an abusive relationship, even though it is detrimental to their health. And most of their children will have less of an education, if an education at all. I just wanted to end with this. While I was researching, I found that it was interesting that a lot of people were talking about Pinterest and how Pinterest has actually aided in this double standard of us needing to be successful businesswomen and also of taking care of our children, specifically with the wedding part of it, saying how the site's popularity highlights an uncomfortable reality. Pinterest's user-generated content, which overwhelmingly emphasizes recipes, home decor, and fitness and fashion tips, feels like a reminder that women still seek out the retrograde, materialistic content that women's magazines have been hawking for decades, and that this internet was supposed to help overcome. And I just thought that keep this in the back of your head and just remember as you're reading, whether this is whatever you're understanding about motherhood, whether it's a double standard or if it's your belief.
My name is Patricia, and I'll be talking about poverty's effect on children, and especially their education. Children who are in poverty are found to be malnourished, stressed, illiterate, and in toxic environments found in poverty, and this heavily affects children's academics. And language development, the ability to plan, remember details, and pay attention in school were seen in children under poverty. Studies have shown that middle-class children have roughly twice as many working vocabulary as opposed to those who are in poverty. And poor children and teens are also at greater risk for several negative outcomes such as poor academic achievement, school dropout, abuse and neglect, behavioral and socio-emotional problems, physical health problems, and developmental delays. And here's just a graph pertaining to what I said before. And barriers children and their families encounter when trying to access physical and mental health care are also huge role players to why children have difficulties in school. The National Center for Education Statistics reports that in 2008, the dropout rate of students living in low-income families was about 4.5 times greater than the rate of children from higher-income families, from 8.7% versus 2.2%. Some behavioral problems may include impulsiveness, difficulty getting along with peers, aggression, ADHD, and conduct disorder. Some emotional problems may include feelings of anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. And here's just a few statistics. U.S. Census data reveals that from 2009 to 2010, the total number of children under age 18 living in poverty increased to 16.4 million from 15.5 million. Child poverty rose from 20.7% in 2009 to 22% in 2010, and this is the highest it's ever been since 1993. The Population Reference Bureau in 2010 reports that 24% of the 75 million children under the age of 18 in the U.S. live in single-mother families. The poverty rate for children living in female household families with no spouse present was 42.2% in 2010. 7 in 10 children living with a single mother are poor or low income, compared to less than a third, 32%, of children living in other types of families. A staggering 50.9% of female-headed Hispanic households with children below 18 years of age live in poverty. 48.8% for blacks, 31.6% for Asian, and 32.1% for non-Hispanic white. And here's just a graph of children in poverty who are also uninsured, which is a huge problem that we see today. So many families and of course the children are affected by that, are uninsured. What we could do to help. Such deficiencies are reversible through intensive interventions such as focused lessons and games that encourage children to think out loud or use executive function. And here at Messiah, you could see that there's like a Boys and Girls Club that you could volunteer at, and they work extensively to do that for children. Intensive interventions, volunteer your time with charities and organizations that provide assistance to low-income and homeless children and families. Donate money, food, and clothing to homeless shelters and other charities in your community. Donate school supplies and books to under-resourced schools in your area. And also to just make this known for all the children who go unheard every day. And just we're excited.
Hi, my name is Kara Jackson, and I'm going to talk about women entering and progressing in the workplace. Okay, so finding a job after college. America is in one of the biggest unemployment rate problems, like today, like now. With the lack of jobs, many people are finding that they are in some of the lowest financial situations of their lives. The unemployment rates have grown so much that students graduating with college degrees can't even get jobs. And as a result, many students are moving back in with their families. So this chart shows the differences between a woman's salary and a man's salary despite degree level. If you look at the top of the chart, you can see a high school diploma. A man can earn $39,010 as their annual salary in comparison with a woman who can only earn $28,380 for their annual salary, and that's only with a high school diploma. Now at the bottom of the chart, you can see the doctorate degree. A man can earn $100,000 for their annual salary, while a woman can only earn $74,030 for their annual salary. That's about a $25,000 difference. So why is there a huge gap? The glass ceiling. Okay, so this problem is described as the glass ceiling by Ann Morrison. She describes the problem as the glass ceiling is a barrier so subtle that it is transparent, yet so strong that it prevents women from moving up the corporate hierarchy. So this means that although a woman can see her opportunities and see the ways in which she can get that opportunity, there's still a glass ceiling. There's still something that is holding her back. And the glass ceiling is made up of stereotypes and assumptions that women cannot function in the corporate hierarchy. Another obstacle is a double bind. A double bind is a behavioral norm that creates a situation where a person cannot win no matter what she does. So a good example of this would be a female manager who is normally very strict. So then somebody would say she's acting very masculine, but she's still a woman. Or if she was acting very lenient towards everybody, then she's considered weak because she's feminine. She should not be considered weak or masculine. She's a female in charge and should be strict. And it should not do anything to her reputation in the workplace. So, women's progress. Once a person attains a job, normally their next goal is to get a promotion. Promotions can be the difference between living life paycheck to paycheck or being stable. Unfortunately, many women face the obstacle of gender discrimination in promotions. Climbing up the ladder in the workplace can be a longer and harder process. And here are a few examples of how we can counteract gender discrimination. One, correct representation of women in media and their proactive role as media persons in changing perspectives. So this means not just like putting women out there to sell Coca-Cola or something just because of sex appeal. This means being serious and like putting good portrayals of women, clean portrayals of women in the media. Participation and leadership of women in religious and faith-based community groups and legal systems is critical. This is critical because we need an example of what women leadership looks like in our society. Without that example, people are still afraid to put women in leadership roles in the workplace. Encourage women and girls to enter into traditionally male-dominated fields of education and professions. We need younger girls to start going into professions that males used to have, because if they're not there, they won't have the opportunities to get the higher paying jobs that they want and that they need to sustain their lives, their families' lives. Promotion of shared domestic responsibilities between women and men. For example, parenting, caregiving. Just switch it up a bit, and then you can see that it's really not hard to do either one, and it's for either the man or the women. But yeah, so these are just a few examples of how we can change the way that women are viewed in the workplace and the possibility of promotions for women in the workplace.
Hello, my name is Susanna Goodman, and I'll be talking about African American marriage and single motherhood. So just some stats on African American marriage in the U.S. These are from the U.S. Census Bureau 2010-2011. So only 32% of African American adults in the U.S. are married, compared to the 51.3% of adults in total for other races. 46.8% of African Americans have never been married, and 28.7% of African American women are now married versus the 35.8% of African American men that are married. Reasons for why there's a very high birth rate among unmarried black mothers. So there's been a very long history of segregation in this country, and although it's not as much a problem now as it was about 40 years ago, things that happened during that time period are still affecting us. Like there's a higher likeliness of blacks going to inferior schools because their education wasn't as valued into the 60s as it was now, and their schools are still not receiving the proper resources that they need to get a better education and be more successful in life. And because they're not receiving the education that they need to succeed in life, they're also not prepared to compete for jobs. If they can't get into a good college, they're not getting college education, they're not getting a college diploma, meaning that they don't have what they need to compete for higher paying jobs and provide for themselves and their families. Also, unmarried black mothers, because they don't have a man in the house and they are not receiving that second income for financial support, they are on welfare, and they have more of a financial reason to stay on welfare because there's not many eligible black men to be married, which leads into my other point. There's not a lot of black men supposedly to be married because there was a jump in drug use in the past 30 to 40 years, and so a lot of these men, black men that would have been eligible to be married, are now in jail, or they are out of jail, but because of their criminal record, they are not being offered jobs, they don't have many employment opportunities, so women just rather would stay on the welfare system because it's more stable than taking a risk on a man who may not be able to be employed. So just a quote, black families with children under 18 headed by a single mother have the highest rate of poverty at 46.5% compared to only 8.6% of married black families being in poverty. And this is also from the U.S. Census Bureau. 30% of black households are families headed by single women. And then another topic under the umbrella of single motherhood, education of single black mothers. So a quote from Carrie Orfield, when a single mother fails to obtain education, it has a very strong negative impact on at least 2 generations and the family and men-related community and social costs. So basically, when a single black mother is not educated, there's a very high chance that her children are also not going to be receiving the education that they need to succeed, because they're probably going to be in a low-income area, and they're not going to be going to schools that would support them getting an education, preparing them to get into college and get a very good paying job. And another quote from Gary Orfield: "Across racial and age groups, education is the strongest predictor of single motherhood in the U.S. Although single mothers who do not finish high school, approximately 20% are African Americans." This would be like a very high percentage of African American women getting pregnant in high school, and because of being pregnant in high school, they are not able to finish high school, and they're just stuck at home, and they're not, because you're single and don't have another income, or you're not married or anything, you're not really going to employ you. So, just sources. Yes.
I'm Elena, and I'll be presenting on the domestic violence aspect, and specifically zeroing in on a specific type of domestic violence. First of all, domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and/or other abusive behaviors perpetrated by an intimate partner against another. It is difficult to know how common domestic abuse is because most cases go unreported. It occurs across all spectrums regardless of your age, gender, race, educational background, or socioeconomic status. 85% of the victims are women. About 1 in every 4 women will be victims of abuse at some point in their life. Women between the ages of 20 to 24 are at the greatest risk. And like poverty, domestic violence is something that filters down through generations. 50% of girls who grow up in an abusive home will go on to experience abuse later in life. Likewise, boys who grow up in an abusive home are 1,500 times more likely to be abusive themselves. Women who come from low incomes are more likely to be victims of domestic abuse. Victims are oftentimes reluctant to leave because they are financially dependent on their abuser. And even if they do want to leave, it is estimated that it takes about 8 attempts before they successfully escape. Economic abuse is, in itself, a type of domestic abuse. An abuser can negatively influence an individual's opportunity for finding and retaining a job. Abusers primarily control their victims by controlling their resources or their ability to become financially independent. It can also impact a victim's access to education and job training. This type of abuse takes many forms and occurs across all socioeconomic statuses, and it can continue even after the victim has left the abuser. Just some statistics about that. 35 to 56% of victims say that they have been harassed at work. 1/4 to 1/2 say that they have lost a job due to the abuse. And it is estimated that about 1.75 million workdays are lost each year due to domestic abuse. So what does economic abuse look like? Some examples include preventing your victim from receiving an education, destroying their property, destroying their credit, not allowing them to go to work, not allowing them to have their own bank account, bothering them at work through unexpected visits or multiple phone calls, not paying child or spousal fees ordered by the court. So what's being done to solve the problem? The Survivors Empowerment and Economics Act is moving through the House and Senate. If this legislation is enacted, it will give victims employment leave, unemployment compensation, short-term emergency benefits for those who demonstrate a financial need. It will also prohibit employers from discriminating against victims of domestic violence and prohibit the denial or restriction of insurance coverage for victims.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Longoria, and I will be presenting on the feminization of homelessness in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We're going to start with a broad view of homelessness. On any given night in the United States, 672,000 men, women, and children experience homelessness. 42% of those people are unsheltered, meaning they're either living on the streets or in a place that's not inhabitable for humans. Research indicates that families, single mothers, and children make up the largest group of people who are homeless in rural areas, such as central Pennsylvania. The most common makeup of a homeless family is a mother with 1 or 2 children. And I think that goes against what most people typically view as a homeless person, which is, a middle-aged man standing on a street corner asking you for money. And that's not necessarily true. 65% of all homeless people with families are women, whose children make up 39% of the nation's homeless population. 42% of those children are under the age of 5. So homelessness in Pennsylvania specifically, while we don't know the exact number of homeless people because it's kind of a hard thing to track, we do know that they include a large number of single moms, veterans, and far too many children. Like I just said, 42% of which are under the age of 5. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is approximately 11.4 square miles. And in 2010, Ken Ross, who is the spokesperson for Bethesda Mission, estimated that there are about 300 homeless men, women, and children in Harrisburg alone. So if we take those two statistics, that's approximately 26 homeless people for every square mile of Harrisburg, or 26 homeless people for Messiah College's Grantham campus. The reasons and effects, just like Elena was just saying, battered women who live in poverty are often forced to choose between that abusive relationship and homelessness. And while it doesn't seem like much of a choice to us, when you're in an abusive relationship, oftentimes it's a lot easier to stay there than it would be to live on the street with your young children as a single mother. And from 2007 to 2009, the number of families in homeless shelters, which is defined as a household with at least 1 adult and 1 minor child, leapt to 170,000 from 131,000. And most of those, the big problem with this is that most housing for homeless people in the United States isn't open to women. We have a lot of men's homeless shelters. We don't have very many women's shelters. In Pennsylvania specifically, there are only 10 shelters that support women, only 2 of which are in the Harrisburg area. And even with those shelters that do support women and their families, a lot of them have an age-out rate for children. So if you're a single mother with a young son, once he gets to a certain age, he is considered a threat to the women in the home, and you're required to leave that home. And I got the opportunity just last weekend to spend a dinner at Bethesda Mission with a homeless woman, and she said something that really just struck me. She said, "People here are really radical. They're fighting over a pack of meat. It's ridiculous." And while that quote was in response to another soup kitchen that she often frequents, it just really struck me as being kind of, a big problem. The Harrisburg area has almost 50,000 people in it. And if these 50,000 people, us included, aren't taking care of the food and the shelter and the transportation of these homeless women and their children, then I think we're missing a really big part of our call. Thank you.
I will be presenting for Joyce Lawrence Abraham, who's unable to be with us today. I will be giving you some statistics and then zeroing in on a specific organization and what they're doing to help the cause. Poverty is generational and it is a hard cycle to break. Imagine this scenario: a single mom, a low income, poor educational system for the children, and possible drug or alcohol problems. How does this impact the children? Statistics show that 62% of Americans, both male and female, born in the top 5th incomes will stay in the top 2/5. Likewise, 65% of those born in the bottom 5th incomes will stay in the bottom 2/5. Women are paid 77% of what men are, even with the same qualifications. The job market economy is very competitive and demanding, requiring more specialized education. Less than 30% of those born in the bottom quarter of incomes enroll in a 4-year school. Among that group, less than half graduate. Going back to school is difficult because of the financial aid status, and eligibility for financial aid such as students' loans is very limited. If you add in drug or alcohol problems or criminal problems, it makes it even more difficult. But putting statistics aside, the bigger question is, does society allow you to rise above your circumstances? Even entry-level minimum wage jobs are becoming more competitive and even more challenging, as I said, if you have a criminal background. The nonprofit organization of Arizona Women's Education and Employment sees this trend every day. The CEO stated that 15% of the women who found a job through their organization had to come back to them for their second job, but following the recession, that number rose to about 25%. So, the Promise Place is an organization which Joyce is currently working with, and it's a parole option for women who have gone through the Dauphin County Prison or drug and rehab programs. These women have no homes, no jobs, and little or no contact with their family. The Promise Place has a slogan that says it all. It's all about change. The Promise Place seeks to restore hope in the lives of these changed women by providing them with safe housing, transportation, employment opportunities, money management advice, community service opportunities, and counseling. Meet Maritza. This is a woman who can attest to the difference that the Promise Place is making for the women who go through their organization. She talks about how the Promise Place helped her to get job training, find, and keep a job, and she also says that they helped to get her in contact with her family and ultimately get her life back on track. Her story is so successful because the Promise Place does not only see women from an economic perspective, but they see them as the whole person and address their needs as they see fit. Thank you.
So before we open up for questions, I think it's important to try to piece everything together. Each one of these students was trying to provide a different facet to feminization of poverty. Poverty that it has a female face is not just unique to the United States, although many of the pieces that they were talked about were US based, but it does include a global perspective. Education, as spoken, whether it's access to education or what happens when after education women head into the workplace and the access to jobs and fair pay and advancement within those jobs. It's definitely a component that allows women to either stay within their own social strata or be able to rise above it. Having children and being able to provide for those children, whether in a single income household or within a family, will also impact the access and the view of poverty in the world and also within the United States. And I think finally, homelessness and domestic violence is one of those components that sometimes we don't try to associate with poverty, yet it is both a reason why so many women may fall under domestic violence and as a result also homelessness, or might be also a consequence of these acts. I think it's important to realize that whether in hypotheticals or just the theoretical components of feminization of poverty, that the face of this issue is very much present not only in our local society here in Harrisburg, but it's always going to be present within the world, only if we'll be able to see it if we're willing to see beyond just the need of individuals or whether they're part of the welfare system of this country or of others. I think it is important to realize that these women may be mothers, may be daughters, and may be the wives or even your own family.